The first time the keypad code changed, I thought it was a mistake. That sounds naive now, but if you had asked me then, I would have told you my husband was the most predictable man on the planet. 8 years of marriage will do that. You build a life around someone's patterns until they feel like part of the house itself. The creak in the hallway floor, the coffee maker that sputters before it starts. Ryan was like that. Solid, reliable, almost boring in a comforting way. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Denver, the kind of neighborhood where everyone has a dog, a grill, and a lawn they care about just a little too much. Our house wasn't huge, but it was ours. A 2-story with white siding, a maple tree out front, and a garage that Ryan had been obsessed with renovating for the past 3 months. The garage was supposed to be my gift. That's how he pitched it. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, and for years I joked about wanting a studio space that wasn't our dining table. Ryan took that idea and ran with it. One night last fall, he came home with takeout and a big roll of blueprints, like he was about to unveil a surprise on one of those home renovation shows. "I'm turning the garage into your studio," he said, spreading the plans across the table. Insulation, drywall, heat, built-in desk, the works. I remember laughing because it sounded excessive. "You're going to spend all that money so I can sit in a fancy room and draw logos for dog groomers?" "Exactly," he said. He had this proud smile on his face like he'd just solved world hunger. The project became his whole personality after that. Every weekend he was out there with tools, music blasting, sawdust drifting into the driveway. Our neighbors would stop and ask what he was building, and Ryan would launch into these long explanations about ventilation and lighting like he was constructing a NASA lab. I stayed mostly out of it, partly because I trusted him, and partly because Ryan had this thing about surprises. He didn't want me seeing the finished studio until it was perfect, so the garage door stayed closed. At first, the only weird thing about the renovation was how often he worked on it at night. Ryan had a full-time job managing a distribution warehouse, which meant he was usually home by 5. We'd eat dinner, watch something mindless, and then around 8 he'd grab a beer and head out to the garage. Sometimes he wouldn't come back inside until midnight. "You're going to burn yourself out," I told him once. "Nah," he said, "I'm on a roll." He looked happy, energized, like the project meant something to him. Looking back now, that should have been the first red flag. Ryan wasn't the kind of guy who got energized about drywall. About 6 weeks into the remodel, he installed a keypad lock on the interior door that led from the house into the garage. I remember standing there staring at it. "Why does the garage need a security system now?" I asked. "It's not security," he said casually. "It's just easier than keys." "Easier for who?" "Contractors, deliveries, stuff like that." That answer made sense at the time. He had been ordering a lot of materials online. Boxes showed up constantly. Lights, shelving units, some kind of fancy epoxy flooring kit. So he punched in the code and the door clicked open. "See?" he said. "What's the code?" Ryan grinned. "Nice try." I rolled my eyes, assuming he was being dramatic about the surprise again. "Seriously?" "You'll see it when it's done," he said. That was the first time the garage became off-limits. At night I'd hear him moving around out there. Power tools, footsteps, sometimes the low murmur of his voice like he was talking on the phone. When I asked about it, he'd shrug. Supplier stuff. Or just a call with the contractor. Eventually, I stopped asking. Marriage does that to you too. You learn which curiosities are worth pushing and which ones just lead to pointless arguments. About 2 weeks later, the keypad code changed. I didn't even realize it at first. One afternoon, I went to grab a package that had been delivered, and the door wouldn't open. The keypad blinked red at me. Wrong code. I tried the one Ryan had used before, the only one I'd seen. Still red. When he got home that evening, I mentioned it while we were making tacos. "Hey, the garage door code stopped working." Ryan barely looked up from the cutting board. "Yeah, I changed it." "Why?" "Security." I laughed a little. "You said it wasn't about security." "Well, now it is." That was the whole explanation. Something about the conversation sat wrong with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Ryan wasn't acting nervous or defensive. If anything, he seemed relaxed, normal. Later that night, while we were watching a show on Netflix, he got a text. I saw the screen light up on the coffee table. He grabbed the phone quickly and flipped it face down. Again, it was subtle. If you blinked, you'd miss it. But after 8 years with someone, you notice the tiny shifts. "Work?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, but he didn't elaborate. About 20 minutes later, he stood up. "Gonna run out to the garage for a bit." I checked the clock. 10:47 p.m. "You're still working on that thing?" "Almost done." He kissed the top of my head and walked to the keypad door. I heard the soft beep of the numbers being pressed, the click, then silence. That night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't jealousy exactly, or suspicion, just a weird buzzing feeling in my chest, like a mosquito whining in the dark. Ryan stayed out there for almost 2 hours. When he finally came back inside, I pretended to be asleep. He moved quietly, but I felt the mattress dip when he got into bed, and I smelled something strange on his clothes. Not sawdust, not paint, perfume. Very faint, like he tried to air it out. I told myself I was imagining things. The next few days went back to normal. Ryan went to work, I worked from home, we grocery shopped on Saturday and argued about which movie to watch like we always did. If there was something going on, he was hiding it perfectly. Then came the volunteering. Ryan announced it over breakfast one Sunday morning. I signed up to help with a community outreach program, he said, pouring orange juice. I blinked at him. You? Ryan was not exactly the volunteering type. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, smiling. Nothing, it's just surprising. It's through a church downtown, he said. They do food drives and stuff. Since when are you religious? I'm not, it's just helping people. He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. But the volunteering meant he'd be gone most of Saturday afternoons. Usually 4 or 5 hours, he said. I told him it was great. Supportive wife, right? The first Saturday he went, he came home around 7 in the evening. He looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd spent the day doing something meaningful. How was it? Good, he said. What did you do? Organizing donations mostly. Again, vague, but not suspicious enough to fight about. For the next month, Saturdays became Ryan's volunteer days. He'd leave around noon, come back around 7. Sometimes he'd shower immediately when he got home, and sometimes, just sometimes, I caught that faint smell again. Perfume. I ignored it. Until the afternoon, everything cracked open. It was a Thursday. Ryan had texted me that he'd be late from work because he needed to stop by the garage supply store for one last thing for the remodel. Around 6, I realized I needed a tape measure for a project I was working on. Ryan usually kept tools in the garage. I walked to the keypad door, stared at it, and then, almost without thinking, I typed Ryan's birthday. The keypad flashed green. The lock clicked open. My stomach dropped as the door slowly swung inward, because the garage didn't look anything like a studio. It looked like a place set up for something else entirely. And the first thing I noticed wasn't the furniture. It was the wedding arch. The wedding arch was white, not the cheap plastic kind you'd see at a backyard barbecue ceremony. This thing was solid wood, painted carefully, with delicate carved patterns along the sides. It stood right in the middle of the garage like some surreal art installation. For a few seconds, I just stood in the doorway staring at it, convinced my brain had misfired. Because the rest of the garage looked nothing like a construction zone either. There was no drywall dust, no half-finished shelves, no piles of tools scattered around like Ryan always claimed there were. The concrete floor had been coated with a glossy gray epoxy finish that reflected the overhead lights like water. Along the left wall were rows of white folding chairs stacked neatly in groups of 10. On the right side, there was a long wooden table covered with a cream-colored linen cloth. At the center of that table sat a small box of votive candles. Candles? In our garage? My first thought was that Ryan was secretly running some kind of event rental business and hadn't told me, which would have been weird but not terrifying. But then I walked farther inside, and I saw the flowers. They weren't real, but they were arranged carefully along the arch. Soft white roses and eucalyptus vines twisted around the beams in perfect symmetry. Beneath it sat a narrow platform, like the kind a couple might stand on during vows. My heart started beating faster. Ryan? I called out automatically. My voice echoed against the walls. Silence. The garage felt staged, too clean, too deliberate, like a room waiting for something to happen, or something that already had. I moved slowly across the floor, my sneakers squeaking slightly against the epoxy. There was a small sound system set up in the corner, 2 speakers on stands, a tablet resting on a stool beside them. When I tapped the screen, a playlist popped up. The title said, Ceremony. My mouth went dry. I scrolled. The songs were exactly what you'd expect at a wedding. Soft piano music, instrumental covers of love songs, romantic acoustic tracks. Someone had arranged the whole thing in order. Processional, bride entrance, vows, recessional. My chest felt tight, like the air had thickened. Why would my husband build a wedding setup in our garage? And why wouldn't he tell me about it? I turned slowly in a circle, taking everything in. That's when I noticed the rack of garment bags hanging near the back wall. There were 6 of them, black fabric, zippered. My hands were shaking a little as I walked over and unzipped the first one. Inside was a bridesmaid dress, long, dusty blue, satin, definitely not mine. I zipped it back up and opened the next one. Another dress, same color. 3rd bag, 4th. By the time I reached the last one, my pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I unzipped it slowly. A wedding dress, ivory lace, strapless, elegant but simple, the kind of dress you'd see in a boutique window. I touched the fabric. It was real, heavy, expensive, and it definitely wasn't mine. Ryan and I had gotten married in a courthouse with 2 friends and a bottle of champagne afterward. No dress, no ceremony. We always said we'd do something bigger later, but life kept moving and the idea faded. Now there was a full wedding setup sitting in our garage, without me. I stepped back from the dress like it might explode. My brain was scrambling for explanations. Maybe Ryan was helping someone else plan a wedding. Maybe this was some favor for a friend. Maybe... My phone buzzed in my hand. Ryan. My stomach flipped as I read the text. Running later than I thought. Probably home around 9. 9. That gave me 3 hours. 3 hours standing inside a secret wedding venue my husband had built 10 feet from a kitchen. I looked around again, this time noticing the details I'd missed before. A small folding table near the arch had a binder sitting on it, the kind of thick 3-ring binder people use for planning events. I opened it. Inside were printed schedules, guest lists, decoration layouts. My eyes skimmed the top page. Ceremony timeline. Saturday, 4 p.m. My brain froze. Saturday, as in 2 days from now. I flipped to the next page. Guest list, 22 people. Most of the names meant nothing to me, but one name did. Ryan Carter. My husband. My fingers felt numb as I turned another page, and there it was, at the top of the document. Wedding ceremony, Ryan Carter and Emily Carter. My vision tunneled for a second. Emily Carter. Not Emily Johnson, not Emily Davis. Emily Carter. The same last name as Ryan. The same last name as me. Except, my name isn't Emily. I stared at the page so long the letters started blurring together. My mind kept rejecting what it was seeing. This had to be some weird coincidence. Another Ryan Carter marrying another Emily Carter. Except, the venue listed at the top was our address, our house, our garage. My throat tightened. I flipped further into the binder, hands moving faster now. There were seating arrangements, music cues, vendor contacts, and then I found a section labeled Efficient Notes. That page had handwritten scribbles across it. Ryan's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. The words were casual, messy, written like someone jotting down reminders. Keep it short. Mention how we met. Emily likes when it's funny. My stomach twisted violently. I kept flipping until a photograph slipped out from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. I bent down to pick it up. The picture showed Ryan standing next to a woman. She was maybe early 30s, dark brown hair falling over her shoulders, pretty in a very effortless way. They were standing outside somewhere sunny, both wearing sunglasses. Ryan had his arm around her waist. They looked comfortable, close, happy. And the way she leaned into him, it wasn't casual. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a date, 3 months ago. Underneath it was a single word, engaged. My entire body went cold. I stared at the smiling version of my husband in that photo, the same man who slept next to me every night, the same man who kissed me goodbye every morning. Except in this picture, he looked different somehow, lighter, like he belonged there, like that life made sense. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another text from Ryan. Actually might swing by the garage tonight to finish the lighting. Don't wait up. My chest felt like it had caved in. He wasn't just renovating the garage. He was building a secret wedding. And in 2 days, he was planning to marry another woman, in my house, while I was still his wife. I stood there for a long time in the silent garage, surrounded by chairs and flowers and a wedding dress meant for someone else.
Trying to figure out how the man I'd loved for 8 years had managed to build an entire second life 10 feet away from me. And the worst part was realizing something slowly, painfully clear. This wasn't new. This had been happening right in front of me. The volunteering, the late nights, the changed keypad code, the perfume. All the pieces were suddenly snapping together in a way that made my stomach churn. Because if the ceremony was Saturday at 4, that meant the rehearsals had probably already happened. The planning meetings, the decorations. Ryan had been walking out that keypad door for weeks, not to build my studio, but to prepare for a wedding I wasn't invited to. I slowly turned back toward the arch, the fake roses, the little platform where vows would be said, and I imagined Ryan standing there, looking into another woman's eyes, promising forever, in the same place he used to park his truck. A strange calm settled over me then, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. Because Ryan thought he had 2 more days before I knew. 2 more days to finish building his secret life. But standing there in that garage, I realized something he hadn't planned for. I knew now, and Saturday was coming. I didn't confront him that night. That probably sounds strange. If someone had told me this story before it happened, I would have assumed the wife storms into the kitchen the second the husband walks through the door, throws the evidence on the table, and demands answers. But when you're actually inside something like that, your brain does this weird survival thing. It slows everything down. Every move feels calculated, like one wrong word might shatter the fragile control you're clinging to. So I closed the garage door. I walked back into the house, and I pretended nothing had happened. Ryan got home around 9:15. I heard his truck pull into the driveway, the engine shutting off with that familiar little rattle. My stomach flipped so violently I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. The man walking through that front door was planning to marry someone else in 2 days, in our garage. I forced my face to stay neutral when he stepped inside. "Hey," he said casually, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. "Hey." He leaned down and kissed my cheek like he always did. Same quick, comfortable gesture. Same faint smell of whatever cologne he wore to work. I wondered if he'd kissed her like that earlier. "How was your day?" he asked. "Fine." I turned back to the stove, pretending to stir the pasta sauce that had been sitting there untouched for 5 minutes. Ryan loosened his tie and glanced toward the keypad door. "I'm going to run out to the garage for a bit," he said. My chest tightened. "Still working on it?" "Just finishing details." He grabbed a beer from the fridge and walked over to the keypad. I watched his fingers enter the code. Beep, click. The door shut behind him, and suddenly the house felt enormous and empty. I stood there staring at the door for a long time. 2 days. He thought he had 2 days before his secret exploded. But the thing about betrayal is that once you see it clearly, you start noticing all the cracks you ignored before. Like the fact that Ryan's phone had been glued to him lately, or how he'd started working out again last winter after years of barely touching a treadmill, or how he suddenly cared about his hair in the mornings. All the tiny shifts I'd brushed off as normal life, now they felt like neon signs I'd somehow missed. After about 10 minutes, I grabbed my purse. I moved quietly down the hallway and slipped out the front door. Ryan's truck was parked in the driveway, exactly where it always sat. But the garage door itself, the big one that faced the street, was closed. If the ceremony was happening in 2 days, he had to be finishing preparations, which meant he'd probably be out there for a while. And for the first time since I found the wedding arch, I realized something important. Ryan had never expected me to open that keypad door, which meant he had no idea I knew. That gave me an advantage. I got into my car and drove. At first, I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed space away from the house, away from the quiet sound of Ryan building his secret wedding 10 feet away. Eventually, I ended up parked outside a bar downtown, the kind with dim lights and a long wooden counter. I ordered a whiskey, even though I almost never drink whiskey. The bartender slid it toward me and asked if I wanted a tab. I shook my head. Just this. The alcohol burned going down, but it helped steady the buzzing in my chest. My mind kept replaying the binder. Ryan Carter and Emily Carter. Who the hell was Emily? I pulled out my phone. Ryan didn't have social media anymore. He deleted everything about 2 years ago, claiming it was a distraction. But I still had accounts, so I searched. Emily Carter. Hundreds of results. Too many. I added Denver to the search. Still dozens. I tried something else. Ryan Carter, Denver. A few familiar things popped up. Old LinkedIn profiles, outdated business listings. Then I noticed something new. A public Instagram account tagged in a photo from 3 weeks ago. The username was Emily Carter Life. My finger hovered over it. For a second, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But curiosity has a way of winning when the truth is already halfway out. I tapped the profile. And there she was. The woman from the photograph in the binder. Same dark hair. Same effortless smile. Her account wasn't huge. Maybe a few hundred followers. Mostly pictures of coffee shops, hiking trails, sunsets. Normal life. Except for the photos that included Ryan. There weren't many. Just enough. A picture of them at a restaurant. Another one hiking somewhere in the mountains. In every photo, they stood close together. Comfortable. Intimate. Like a couple. My throat tightened as I scrolled. Then I hit the post from 2 months ago. It was a picture of her hand holding someone else's. A man's hand. Ryan's hand. You could see his wedding band. Except the caption read, "Still can't believe I get to marry my best friend." Below it was a ring emoji and a date. March 14. Saturday. The same day as the timeline in the binder. My pulse hammered in my ears as I kept scrolling through the comments. Most were simple congratulations. Friends, family. And then I saw something that made my stomach twist. Ryan's comment. 2 more months with my favorite person. 2 months. That meant the engagement announcement happened 2 months ago, while he was still sleeping next to me every night. I felt suddenly dizzy, because the deeper I looked, the more the timeline became clear. Ryan met her months ago, started dating her, proposed, and the entire time he was coming home to me like nothing had changed. My phone buzzed again. A text from Ryan. "Everything good? You're quiet tonight." I stared at the message. He was checking on me while building his wedding venue. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Instead, I typed back, "Yeah, just tired." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, he sent, "Don't wait up, might be late finishing stuff." Finishing stuff. I pictured him adjusting flowers around the arch, testing the music playlist, preparing to promise his life to another woman. I paid my tab and walked back out into the cool night air. My car sat under a streetlight, the metal glowing faintly.
Inside my chest, something had shifted. The shock was fading. In its place was something colder, something clearer. Ryan thought Saturday was going to be the happiest day of his life. A small, intimate ceremony with the woman he planned to replace me with. 22 guests, vows, music. A quiet celebration in the garage he'd spent months transforming. What he didn't know was that the one person he'd worked the hardest to hide it from had already seen everything. The arch, the dress, the guest list, and Emily. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, staring through the windshield. If I confronted him tonight, he'd deny it, or lie, or spin some desperate explanation. And maybe he'd cancel the wedding before it happened. But part of me didn't want that, because Ryan had spent months building the perfect ceremony, every detail carefully planned, every chair arranged, every flower placed exactly where it should go. So an idea began forming slowly in my mind, a quiet, dangerous idea. If Ryan wanted a wedding in our garage on Saturday, then Saturday was exactly when the truth should show up. Friday night was the strangest night of my life. Ryan acted completely normal. We ordered takeout, watched a dumb comedy on the couch, and talked about the grocery list like any other couple winding down before the weekend. If I hadn't seen the garage with my own eyes, I would have believed everything was fine. That was the unsettling part. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't distracted, he wasn't even trying that hard to hide anything. It was like he'd already decided the version of reality we were living in together was temporary, so he didn't need to worry about it anymore. Around 9, he stood up and stretched. "I'm gonna finish a couple things in the garage," he said. "Big day tomorrow?" He smiled a little. Something like that. The words sat in the air between us. I wondered if he realized how close he'd come to telling the truth. He grabbed a flashlight and walked to the keypad door. The soft beeping sound echoed down the hallway as he entered the code. Then he disappeared. I waited about 30 seconds before quietly standing up and moving to the front window. From the street side, the garage door stayed shut. No one looking at our house would have any idea what was hidden inside, but I knew. And by the time Ryan came back into the house around midnight, my plan was already in motion. Saturday morning, he woke up earlier than usual. I heard him in the kitchen around 7, moving quietly like he didn't want to wake me. When I walked in a few minutes later, he was standing at the counter drinking coffee. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He looked strangely energized, like a groom on his wedding day. The thought made my stomach tighten. "Busy day?" I asked casually. "Yeah. The volunteer thing might run late tonight." "Helping people all day again?" "Something like that." He grabbed his keys around 11:30. Before he left, he walked over and kissed me. Same familiar gesture. "Love you," he said. Those 2 words landed differently now. "Love you too," I replied. Then he walked out the door. His truck backed down the driveway and disappeared around the corner. The second he was gone, I stood in the quiet house for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone. The first call I made was to Emily. Her number had been surprisingly easy to find once I knew her last name and workplace. Public records, business directories, a little patience. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" Her voice was calm, friendly. "Hi," I said. "Is this Emily Carter?" "Yes. Who is this?" I took a breath. "My name is Laura Carter." Silence. Just a faint background noise like wind passing over a phone microphone. "I'm Ryan's wife." The silence stretched longer this time. Then she laughed nervously. "I think you have the wrong number." "No," I said, quietly. "I don't." Another pause. "You're getting married today," I continued. "At 4 o'clock. Small ceremony. 22 guests. In a garage that was remodeled with gray epoxy floors and white folding chairs." The air on the line seemed to disappear. "How do you know that?" she asked slowly. "Because it's my garage." There was a sharp inhale. I didn't rush the moment. I just let the truth sit there between us. "I'm not calling to scream at you," I said finally. "I just thought you deserved to know before you walked down that aisle." Her voice came out shaky. "Ryan told me he was divorced." Of course he did. I figured he might say something like that. Another long silence followed. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Are you coming today?" I looked toward the keypad door. "I already am." By 3:30 that afternoon, cars had started appearing on our street. People arrived slowly at first, stepping out of vehicles dressed in soft pastel colors and summer suits. They looked slightly confused as they walked toward the side door Ryan had clearly instructed them to use. From my position across the street, sitting in my car under a large oak tree, I watched them go inside one by one. 22 guests, just like the binder said. At 3:45, Ryan's truck pulled up. He stepped out wearing a navy suit. I'd never seen him look more confident. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Emily stepped out. She was wearing a light coat, probably covering the wedding dress underneath. Her expression was calm, but I noticed the way she avoided Ryan's eyes. Good. Ryan led her toward the side entrance. Just before they reached the door, Emily glanced across the street. Our eyes met through the windshield of my car. For a split second, Ryan didn't notice. Then she gave the smallest nod. It was time. 4 o'clock arrived quietly. From outside, you couldn't hear much. Just faint music drifting through the closed garage door. The ceremony had started. I stepped out of my car and walked across the street. My heels clicked softly against the pavement. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Kids riding bikes at the end of the block. Someone mowing a lawn 2 houses down. No one had any idea what kind of wedding was happening inside that garage. When I reached the side door, I paused. The music shifted to a softer piano melody. Bride entrance. I opened the door. Inside, the garage looked exactly the way it had when I first discovered it. White chairs filled with guests. Soft lights glowing along the walls. The wooden arch decorated with roses. Ryan stood beneath it, next to an older man holding a small book. The officiant. Everyone turned when the door opened. 22 faces staring at me. Ryan's expression changed instantly. Confusion. Then recognition. Then pure, unfiltered panic. "Laura?" he said. Emily stood halfway down the aisle in her wedding dress. She didn't look surprised. She stepped aside slightly, leaving the center path clear. All eyes followed me as I walked slowly forward. Each step echoed on the glossy floor. Ryan's mouth opened like he was about to speak again, but no words came out. I stopped about 6 feet from the arch. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the speakers. I looked around at the guests, then back at Ryan. "You forgot to mention something in your vows," I said calmly. His face had gone pale. "Laura, I can explain." I held up my hand. "No," I said. "You've had 8 years to explain things." I turned slightly toward the crowd.
For anyone who doesn't know me, I continued, I'm Ryan's current wife. A wave of murmurs rippled through the chairs. Ryan's shoulders sagged like someone had cut the strings holding him up. Emily stood perfectly still beside the aisle. She didn't defend him. She didn't look shocked. She just watched. I took one last look at the wedding arch Ryan had spent months building. The flowers, the chairs, the music. Then I looked back at him. "You did a beautiful job with the garage," I said quietly. And with that, I turned and walked back down the aisle, leaving Ryan standing in the wreckage of the wedding he'd built on a lie.